Hi everyone and welcome to our video on stem cells. This is part of our Module 2 Part 6 series looking at cell division, cell diversity and cell differentiation, and in this video we'll be having a look at specification references 2.1.6J, the features and differentiation of stem cells, 2.1.6K, the production of erythrocytes and neutrophils as examples of distinct differentiated cells derived from a common stem cell in bone marrow, and 2.1.6M, the potential uses of stem cells in research and medicine. First thing then, let's understand what a stem cell is. So the definition you need to know for a stem cell is that it is an unspecialized cell that are able to express all genes and divide by mitosis. So the stem cells are not designed to carry out any particular function within the body. They have all genes available that could be expressed, and therefore they are going to divide by mitosis, produce larger numbers of them that will then at a later stage be able to go through the differentiation process to become a specialized cell. We need to be confident in three other terms when it comes to our stem cells. The first one is pluripotent. If we're talking about a cell that is pluripotent, it can give rise to all cell types that make up the body. So our embryonic stem cells are pluripotent. They could become any cell type in the body. The second term, totipotent, these are cells that can form all cell types in the body plus the extra embryonic tissue. So that means it can also form things like the cells of the placenta. Now, these are the types of cells that we find within an embryo in the first couple of divisions after fertilization. So these are the very early embryonic cells. As soon as we get into that slightly later phase of being an embryo, then we're no longer talking totipotent because the cells are no longer able to make these extra embryonic tissues. They are then pluripotent. They can make all the different cell types that make up the body, but not the extra embryonic tissue. We then have multipotent as our third term, and these are the cells that can develop into more than one cell type, but they can't develop into all cell types. So multipotent cells are ones like the adult stem cells that you have in your body right now. They cannot actually become all types of cells. They can only become a limited range of cell types. So pluripotent, totipotent, multipotent. Very easy to mix them up. So I'd suggest that what you do is you get yourself some flashcards, make sure you know these and know what they're able to form. Okay, so the pluripotent, all cell types that make up the body. Totipotent, all cell types in the body plus the extra embryonic tissue. Multipotent, more than one cell type, but not all types of cells. So when we're talking about these stem cells, we are talking about undifferentiated cells, but they do have the ability to express all genes. So all of those genes are present, they could express any of them, and they're able to divide through that process of mitosis to produce genetically identical daughter cells. Now, all of this is going to be very important when we consider that these stem cells are then going to be able to give rise to all of the different types of cells that make up an animal's body. If we think about where these stem cells come from, if we're thinking about just life or where we're applying this to medical research, for example, then we're obviously going to find different locations for the different types of stem cell we've mentioned. So the embryonic stem cells are coming from those early embryos. We are able to get stem cells from the blood from the umbilical cord. And these days, actually, there are companies that will offer that when you have a baby, then they will actually take the blood from the cord and freeze it so that your child then has a future source of their own stem cells available for a lovely low yearly cost, I'm sure. Then we also have the adult stem cells, and these are the ones that you find in your body at the moment, which are going to be from tissues like the blood, your bone, your skin, muscle, etc. Now, one thing that we need to bear in mind is that when we're thinking about stem cells, it's not just what's happening naturally, but we're also looking at this as a big source of potential future research in science. And one place that we can actually obtain stem cells is from a laboratory. And the labs are actually creating what we call induced pluripotent stem cells, iPS cells. And what they're actually doing in these labs is they're taking differentiated cells and reprogramming them. So what they're actually doing is they're switching on certain genes that are actually off in that differentiated cell, and by switching that gene back on, they're basically undifferentiating them once more. So that's obviously a way that we could potentially get a different source of stem cells that are not coming from early embryos, which in the case of research would be coming from the spares from IVF, for example. And obviously there's those kind of ethical concerns around that side. Whereas if we're talking about these induced pluripotent stem cells, where we've just reprogrammed a differentiated cell, that does open up the possibility of creating basically undifferentiated stem cells from regular people, from what they actually have. We could take one of your cells, reprogram it into one of these iPS cells, and then we've got a stem cell for you. So why do we care? What do we want to use all these stem cells for? Well, one thing that we've been doing for quite some time is actually using bone marrow transplants. Now, bone marrow transplants are a well-established treatment for diseases of the blood, so leukemia. And there are also certain immune system diseases as well, like SCID, where we can use these bone marrow transplants to actually give someone a supply of these stem cells, which means their body can then replace the cells it wasn't able to make. Now, it is one of those things that, in all honesty, I think is a super generous and amazing thing to do if you donate bone marrow, because it is not quite as simple and pain-free as other donations that you can do, like blood. So anyone who is a bone marrow donor, you are an amazing human being and you deserve all the love in the world, in all honesty. Another use of our stem cells is in research. So what we can actually do is, in things like medical drugs and their development, then we obviously need to be able to test them on types of cells. Now, the reason we need to do that is because we're not just going to develop a random drug in a lab, find a person and go, here, take this, see what happens. That's not safe, we're not allowed to do that. It's also not really a good thing to do the same sort of thing to some animals that can't give us their consent to just give them random drugs, because we don't know what it's going to do. So if what we can do is actually develop this medium of our stem cells, and we can then get them to differentiate to become the types of cells we want the drug to be tested on, we've now got a supply of those specific types of cell that we need, and we can actually test our drugs on it before we go anywhere near an actual living thing. So this means that we can actually test the effectiveness of our drugs and identify side effects. You know, if we're testing a new drug and all of a sudden we put it on our little stem cells in a lab and every single one of them dies, you're not going to put that drug anywhere near a living creature, or at least I hope you're not. So it means that we can go through some of those early phases of the drug trials in a way that's not affecting any living organism. Another area of research that we can use our stem cells in is in the strand of developmental biology. Because if we've got these stem cells, we can actually get a better understanding of how organisms are actually growing, developing and maturing. Because what we can do is we can look at these individual types of cells from our original stem cell, put it through this process where it will differentiate and see what happens. Now, this actually gives us the opportunity to open up the capacity to see, are there ways that we could actually get more growth or repair of these cells later in life? Or is this something that only works at a very early stage of development and we can't do anything? So what we're trying to do now is have a little look to see, can we use these stem cells for other things? Could we potentially create stem cells that could allow for repair of certain conditions? So what we're opening up are the possibilities of potential medical treatments for diseases as a result of the use of stem cells. Now, this might be because we can repair damaged tissues, or it might be that we can replace tissue that's been lost for whatever reason. And a good example of where we have got quite a lot of research is in type 1 diabetes. So we actually have now done trials with mice that have type 1 diabetes that are being treated with these iPS cells, which have become programmed into becoming these pancreatic beta cells, the ones that produce the human insulin. So anyone with type 1 diabetes cannot make the insulin because for whatever reason their beta cells are not doing so. And therefore, if we've now got a way of basically using these stem cells to become pancreatic beta cells, we can then replace the cells that were lost. So those cells will then be making the insulin, and we've actually reversed the whole problem. We've solved that type 1 diabetes. So this is one area that we're now looking at in terms of developing that treatment in human patients. Another area that they're really looking at with great hope as far as stem cell treatments goes are for nerve tissues and disorders associated with those sort of tissues. So conditions like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, people who've had a spinal injury and therefore have got paralysis, all of these are currently irreversible. But if we had a way that we could utilize these stem cells to then differentiate into nerve tissue in those key regions that the damage has occurred, we could, in theory, reverse those conditions. So potentially in the future, we could use these stem cells to allow someone who is paralyzed to walk again, which would be truly amazing. We're also looking at using bone marrow stem cells to develop into hepatocytes, which are liver cells, so that we can treat liver disease. So those people that have had various infections or some kind of issue with their livers, and therefore it is now damaged and not functioning correctly, we could potentially create new hepatocytes, which would then allow that to be reversed. The final area I'm going to mention is regenerative medicine. Now, regenerative medicine is where we're actually looking at creating these structures using a thing called a bioscaffold. And we're basically going to have, it's almost like a physical structure that we're then going to seed with these stem cells. Now, what we're actually doing at this point is creating the basic shape of what we want, using those stem cells and being able to program them into differentiating into the right things. Then we may be able to grow specific organs. Now, if we're able to do that, what we're able to do is grow an organ for someone that needs a transplant. And because we're using potentially their own stem cells, then we won't be experiencing those same issues of rejection that we find with regular transplants. And so we will not need those patients to take the immunosuppressant drugs that transplant patients currently have to take. So obviously an area that would be super exciting if we can get there. Obviously we are not there yet, but it is one of those regions of science that is obviously relatively new, and maybe some of you are going to go into this field and become the people that actually make this a reality. You are going to be the people that go out and grow an organ so that we no longer have to rely on people sitting on transplant lists waiting for another person to potentially die to get an organ. We can just grow one in a lab to provide anyone that needs an organ with one. As always, I hope you found this video useful, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see when more videos are uploaded, and head on over to the website where you'll find a range of other resources to help you in your A-level biology studies.